In this episode, we move from the network itself to the individual devices that people touch, carry, log into, and depend on every day, because those devices are often where security success or failure becomes very personal and very visible. An endpoint is any device that connects to an organization's environment, which means laptops, desktops, tablets, phones, servers, point-of-sale terminals, and even specialized systems can all become part of the security conversation. For someone studying for the Certified Information Systems Auditor (CISA) exam, endpoint security matters because it sits right at the meeting point between users, data, applications, and the larger infrastructure that supports the business. If an attacker can compromise a device, that single event can lead to stolen credentials, unauthorized access, malware spread, lost data, disrupted operations, and expensive recovery work. Once you see endpoints as the doors and desks of the digital workplace rather than as simple pieces of hardware, the need for thoughtful protection strategies starts to make immediate sense. Good endpoint security is really about reducing opportunity, increasing visibility, and making sure one weak device does not become the easiest path into everything else. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to understand endpoint security is to think about how much trust organizations place in devices without always realizing it. A laptop may hold business documents, save passwords, browser sessions, email access, and remote connections to internal systems. A mobile phone may carry work messages, authentication apps, calendars, contact lists, and access to cloud services. A desktop in an office may be connected to printers, shared drives, financial systems, customer records, and collaboration tools. Because all of these devices interact with important resources, they are not just endpoints in a technical sense. They are working platforms where identity, data, software, and user behavior come together. That combination creates value, but it also creates risk. A single endpoint can become a launch point for fraud, espionage, sabotage, or accidental data exposure if it is not protected appropriately. This is why endpoint security is not a small side topic inside a larger program. It is one of the most practical and constantly tested parts of the entire control environment. One reason endpoints deserve so much attention is that they are exposed to more variation than many other parts of the environment. People travel with them, share them, forget them in public places, connect them to home networks, install software on them, and use them when tired, distracted, or in a hurry. Unlike a lockdown system sitting in a controlled data center, an employee device lives in the messy reality of daily work. Attackers know this and often aim for endpoints first because human habits and device convenience can open doors that protected backend systems do not easily expose. A phishing email may convince a user to click a link, a malicious file may be opened without enough caution, or an unpatched program may provide the weakness an attacker needs. Endpoints are attractive because they sit close to real users and real work. That means strong device protection is not built on fear alone. It is built on accepting that convenience, mobility, and productivity are necessary, then managing the risk that comes with them in a disciplined and realistic way. Before an organization can protect endpoints well, it needs to know what devices exist, who uses them, what role they serve, and how important they are to the business. This sounds simple, but it is one of the most overlooked foundations of good security. A company cannot secure devices it has not identified, cannot prioritize devices it has not classified, and cannot detect missing protections if it has no reliable record of what should be present. Best practice begins with maintaining an inventory that reflects reality rather than wishful thinking. That inventory should distinguish between managed and unmanaged devices, high-risk and lower-risk roles, corporate-owned and personally owned equipment, and systems that process especially sensitive information. From an audit perspective, a clean inventory is not just an operational convenience. It is evidence that the organization understands its environment and can apply controls intentionally. When endpoints are invisible, security becomes reactive and inconsistent. When endpoints are tracked and categorized, decisions about patching, monitoring, access, and protection become much more defensible and much easier to review. Once devices are identified, the next major protection strategy is establishing a secure baseline for how those devices should be configured. A secure baseline means the organization decides what a normal, approved, and reasonably safe device should look like before it is handed to a user or placed into service. This includes removing unnecessary software, disabling risky features that are not required for the role, applying approved settings, and limiting the ability to make uncontrolled changes. The point is not to create a device that is difficult to use for no reason. The point is to reduce unnecessary exposure by starting from a known good state, instead of letting each device become a custom experiment. Secure configuration is powerful because many incidents do not begin with advanced attacks. They begin with weak defaults, unused services left running, excessive permissions, or old software that nobody thought to remove. A strong baseline also helps support consistency across many devices, which matters greatly for both operations and auditing. If every laptop is different, security becomes harder to measure. If devices follow a standard, exceptions become more visible and easier to challenge. Patching and vulnerability management are also central to endpoint protection because software weaknesses on individual devices often become the entry point for larger incidents. Every device runs operating software and applications, and those components can contain flaws that attackers know how to exploit. When vendors release fixes, organizations need a way to evaluate them, test them appropriately, and deploy them in a reasonable time frame based on risk. The challenge is that patching sounds straightforward until it meets reality. Some devices support critical business work and cannot be interrupted casually. Some applications are fragile, and some users delay updates because they do not want to pause their tasks. Good practice does not pretend these tensions are imaginary. Instead, it builds a repeatable process that balances operational needs with timely risk reduction. Auditors care about this because an unpatched endpoint is often a visible sign of weak control discipline. The key question is not whether every patch is installed instantly. The better question is whether the organization knows what is missing, understands the risk, and acts deliberately rather than leaving weaknesses unmanaged for long periods. Another major strategy is controlling what can run on a device and watching for signs that harmful software is trying to gain a foothold. Many people hear endpoint security and think only of antivirus software, but device protection is broader than scanning files for known threats. Good protection also considers suspicious behavior, unauthorized applications, unusual changes to system settings, and attempts to hide malicious activity from normal view. The best mindset is not to assume that bad software always arrives wearing a clear label. Sometimes it looks like a normal attachment, a browser download, a fake update, or a useful utility that has been tampered with. Restricting unnecessary software installation can therefore be just as important as detecting known malware. The fewer uncontrolled programs a user can add, the fewer chances there are for accidental compromise. From an audit standpoint, this means reviewing whether the organization has policies, technical safeguards, and monitoring practices that work together. Protection is stronger when prevention, detection, and response support each other instead of operating as disconnected efforts. Identity and access management on the endpoint is another vital part of the picture because a device is only as trustworthy as the access it grants and the sessions it maintains. If users have more privileges than they need, harmful actions become easier whether the cause is error, curiosity, or compromise. This is why least privilege matters at the device level as much as it does at the network or application level. Routine work should not require broad administrative power, and highly sensitive actions should be limited carefully. Strong authentication also reduces risk, especially when organizations use multi-factor authentication, MFA, for important accounts and remote access paths. A stolen password is dangerous, but it becomes much less useful when additional proof of identity is required. Device protection strategies should also consider idle session locks, account review, and the removal of unnecessary local accounts that remain long after their business purpose has ended. When auditors examine endpoint controls, they often focus on whether access is constrained thoughtfully rather than granted out of habit or convenience. Protecting the data that lives on endpoints is equally important because devices often store more information than users realize. Files may be saved locally for convenience. Browser sessions may preserve access to sensitive systems, and temporary copies of documents may remain long after a task is finished. If a device is lost, stolen, or compromised, that local data can turn a single hardware event into a broader business problem. Good endpoint protection, therefore, includes reducing unnecessary local storage, controlling synchronization thoughtfully, and making sure sensitive information is handled according to policy no matter where it appears. This also connects to screen locking, clean desk habits, secure disposal, and care around removable media, such as a universal serial bus, USB, drive. People sometimes think of device protection as something that happens only inside the machine, but physical surroundings and user habits matter just as much. An unlocked laptop in a conference room or a sensitive file copied to an uncontrolled external device can defeat many technical safeguards. Effective protection works best when technical controls and practical behavior reinforce each other. Remote work has made endpoint strategy even more important because organizations no longer operate within a single building or under a single predictable set of conditions. Devices now connect from homes, airports, hotels, shared workspaces, and personal networks that the organization does not directly control. This means device trust has become a major decision point. If a compromised or poorly managed laptop connects to business services from anywhere, the location matters less than the condition of the device itself. Many organizations also deal with bring your own device, BYOD, arrangements, where personal phones or laptops are used for work activities. That approach can support flexibility and productivity, but it also creates questions about ownership, monitoring, privacy, support, and data separation. A mature strategy defines what is allowed, what protections are required, and what the organization can inspect or enforce on personal equipment. Auditors pay close attention here because informal remote work habits often grow faster than formal controls. When policy lags behind practice, endpoint risk usually increases long before leadership fully understands the exposure. Monitoring endpoints is another best practice because prevention alone is never enough. Even well-managed devices can experience suspicious events, policy violations, attempted intrusions, or user mistakes that require attention. Monitoring helps organizations collect useful evidence about what happened on a device, when it happened, and whether the activity fits normal patterns. The value of this visibility is not merely technical. It supports investigation, incident response, control testing, and the ability to determine whether a problem is isolated or part of a larger pattern. Good monitoring also needs context. A single event may mean very little by itself, but several related signs across multiple devices may reveal a developing attack or a recurring control weakness. For auditors, endpoint monitoring is important because it shows whether the organization can move beyond assumptions and review actual behavior. Logs, alerts, and device status information can provide strong evidence, but only if they are protected, reviewed appropriately, and connected to a response process that people understand well enough to use under pressure. No endpoint protection strategy is complete without a plan for what happens after something goes wrong. Devices fail, become infected, are misplaced, are stolen, or show signs that someone has used them in ways that were never intended. When that occurs, organizations need a clear process for containment, investigation, communication, and recovery. A device may need to be isolated from the environment, preserved for analysis, re-imaged, restored, or replaced depending on the nature of the incident. What matters most is that the response is guided by policy and preparation rather than improvisation alone. This is another place where beginner learners can see the difference between having a control and having a control environment. A tool on a device is not the whole story. The larger question is whether people know how to recognize trouble, escalate it, protect evidence, notify the right teams, and return the user to safe operation without creating unnecessary confusion. From the audit view, preparation and documentation are powerful indicators of maturity because they show the organization has thought beyond prevention and planned for resilience. It is also worth clearing up a few common misconceptions that make endpoint security harder to understand, because confusion about the subject often leads organizations to focus on the wrong things. One misconception is that endpoint protection is mostly a problem for large enterprises with huge technology budgets, when in reality smaller organizations can be hit just as hard because a single compromised device may still lead to financial loss, customer harm, or operational disruption. Another misconception is that endpoint security is fully solved once protective software is installed. Software matters, but weak settings, poor patch discipline, excessive access, careless user behavior, and missing response processes can still leave the organization exposed. A third misconception is that device protection and user productivity are always in conflict, even though good strategy aims for balance rather than punishment. For CISA students, the most useful way to think about endpoint security is through the lens of control design and control effectiveness. An auditor is not simply asking whether laptops have protective software or whether phones require a passcode. The deeper questions are whether device risks have been identified correctly, whether safeguards align with business needs, whether exceptions are controlled, whether evidence exists to show the controls are working, and whether management responds when the control environment shows weakness. Endpoint security is full of practical audit questions because devices are so closely tied to daily business activity. You can review inventory records, baseline standards, patch reports, access settings, monitoring evidence, policy exceptions, and incident records to judge whether the organization is serious about protecting its devices. That makes this topic especially important for beginners because it connects abstract control ideas to things they already recognize from everyday technology use. The endpoint is where strategy becomes visible, where policy meets human behavior, and where weak discipline often reveals itself very quickly. Endpoint security and device protection strategies should feel less like a scattered collection of technical features and more like a coherent effort to manage the risks that come with everyday computing. Organizations rely on endpoints because work has to happen somewhere, and that means security must account for real users, real devices, real mistakes, and real attackers. The best approach starts with knowing what devices exist, setting secure baselines, keeping software current, controlling access, protecting data, watching for suspicious activity, and preparing to respond when a device becomes a problem instead of a tool. That combination does not make every endpoint perfect, but it does make compromise harder, detection faster, and recovery more controlled. For the CISA learner, that is the main lesson worth carrying forward. Endpoint security is not just about protecting hardware. It is about protecting trust at the place where people and systems actually meet, which is why it remains one of the most important subjects in modern auditing and information protection.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.